This is Professor Darf Seitz. This Java tutorial is about graphical user interface text components. On this example program that we'll be looking at, we have labels and text fields, which are single line data entry fields for text. And here is a multi-line text area. This image here is actually a label, and we have some command buttons to illustrate some interactions with the text fields. You enter text into these fields: first name, last name, height, 6 feet, number of inches, 2 inches, weight, 190, tree climbing experience. I climbed many trees as a boy. Then if we take some words and type some more things, we'll see that we get word wrapping. Take some words here and paste them in. We get word wrapping and vertical scrolling. So this text area is hosted in a vertical scroll pane. Display inches, we get 74. That's the total height. That's taken these text fields, converted them to numbers for calculations, and performed a simple calculation. And if we want to reset everything, there's a reset button. There's the title up there in the title bar and the title on the page. Everything's neatly laid out with some J-panels and things that we'll look at. Let's look at the program. Here we are in the program. Some comments talking about the different highlights we'll be looking at. Text components class extends JFrame. We'll be using a J-panel as our content pane rather than the default container. We have some command buttons. Labels is a form of text component. Text area and J text fields for the single line entry. Some fonts that we'll be changing to 14-point font. We call the superclass, we call our set fonts function, and here's where we set up our J panel as our main container, and we set it to have a border on the top, left, bottom, and right of 10 pixels all the way around. We set its layout to be a border layout, which is just what the normal default content layout is. And then we set the content pane to that J panel. Here we create our components, our title, changing the font, centering it. Our image is a J label that takes a new image as in a constructor, and we set its tooltip text to say, can you climb this? We'll look at that when we run the program again. Labels here for the fields, all these labels. A few of them we set the font with a null that restores the default font, different than the 14-point that we set up across the board. And we have a spacer item here too, that we have a function called set specific size, passing in our item and the dimensions that we want. We use that for spacing because of the panel flow layout. We want things to go on to flow appropriately to the next row at a certain point. Then text box fields here being instantiated. The text area has 5 rows and 25 columns. Line wrapping is set, and words wrapping as well. Here's the scroll pane that hosts it. We set it and give it the text area to the constructor, and then we set its scroll policy to be always scrolling vertically. Our command buttons down here. And then we have to add the components to our contents. So we're going to add our title to the north of the border layout, the image on the west side, which is the left, our fields, taking them, we're going to have a panel that we're going to put our fields into called Panel Fields 1, and it will have a border of 10 on the top, 20 on the left, 10 on the bottom, and 0 on the right. So we're getting a border around our main panel in there, our center panel. This is going to be added to the center area of the border layout. So it's going to have some padding around it through this empty border. And then in there we put the first name, label, and text, the last name. The height needs a panel of its own so that we can have all those height fields all on the same flow row. The weight and the experience are all added to this panel, and then we add that panel to the center area of our main panel. Our buttons go in the south of our border layout. We set our submit button to be, we set our reset button to be a submit button, so it's invoked by the keyboard enter key. Create and instantiate our event handler that we've declared below. We register it on the buttons. Set the size of our window. We want it to be a fixed size at that point, so we set resizable to false. Here's the display inches function, but we'll come back to that. Go down to our event handler down here, command handler. It implements the action listener interface, has an action performed function that it must implement. It gets the action event, gets the source, and checks whether it's from the display inches or the reset, and calls a function accordingly for each one. Here's where we set specific size for that spacer. We take a component and a dimension, and when you set its minimum size, its preferred size, and its maximum size, and you have to get all those, that will fix the component size. Here's where we set the fonts for the button, label, text area, and text field to our fonts that we set up using the UI Manager put with a token here. Reset takes our text fields and text areas and sets their text to null strings, empty strings actually. And here is where we display inches. We need to use parse int on the string that's returned from the get text, because you get text from these text fields, not numbers. We have to use parse int with the integer wrapper class. That can throw an exception if it's a number that's not, if it's text that's not formatted as a number. If we get that, we catch it here and we display the height fields must be numeric. Otherwise, we do our computation of 12 times the height in feet, which we got as an integer, plus the height in inches, and display the result. So it's a pretty simple little program here. Basically, let's run it again. Actually, before we run it, let's review the main highlights that we noticed. There was border padding, setting up borders around the main panel and the center panel. We changed some fonts. We converted from text fields to numbers. There was event handling. We used panels for grouping the items for the layout. There was a scroll pane and a submit button. Now let's look at the program again. Here this time we'll look at the tooltip over the image. Can you climb this? And again, we can interact with these fields through events and detect when things are numeric or not, clear things out. So This little program summarizes the basic text components, labels for text or images, text fields, which are single line, text entry with various lengths, widths here that you set up in the program. You give it with the constructor how many characters wide you want it. In a text area wrapped in a scroll pane. So that is an example here showing you the text components of the main ones in a GUI.